Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning. How you doing, everybody? It is Thursday, October 26th, 2023. We'll try and carry on the best we can today because, of course, it's been a while, I think, since we had to start this way, but we are, as you likely know, under the cloud once again of a mass shooting. That's a fairly frequent occurrence, although, I don't know, I feel like it's been a while, but it really hasn't. And of course, the strict definition of mass shootings, they happen all the time. There's one every day. But the type that grabs our attention in this country, where we are pretty numb to the occurrence of mass shootings, it's been a while since we've been able to focus on that. But here we are with the speaker's election now done. I think we covered that pretty well yesterday, just in terms of, one, preparing you for who Mike Johnson is, and two, Greg, I think, read the situation pretty clearly yesterday, although missing on one minor detail. I mean, it really is the most minor possible detail, was that he said, well, you know, Ken Buck still says he won't vote for anybody who backed the insurrection, who voted not to certify the Electoral College vote. And I said, well, you know, Ken Buck is Ken Buck. He could always go crazy and just say, to hell with it, I'm going to. And then he did. So there you go. But so did everybody else. And Greg was, I think, pretty clear-eyed in saying, well, you know, this is like, well, first of all, it's a 900th vote for speaker. But he really did, I think, read the room correctly in saying, Republicans are tired of going through this. They're embarrassed by how long this has dragged on. If Mike Johnson is anything close to acceptable, they may just take him rather than risk rejecting him and having there be widespread calls for cooperation with Democrats to elect the speaker. Even though that very day we were reeling from the Washington Post calling on Democrats to knuckle under to Republicans and to work with them to pick the Republican of their choice. But okay. Anyway, but I think that was probably a pretty correct assessment. They were tired of doing it. They had been beaten down by this thing. And if they couldn't immediately figure out what their objection was to Mike Johnson, they would probably just go along and get along. And Mike Johnson, in the short time we've been able to try to get to know who he is, has presented a fairly reasonable front. I mean, he's crazy and ultra-conservative and wrong about a number of very, very important things, and we can examine those things. But he has a sonorous voice. He presents calmly. He's not a screamer, and I guess they figured that's what moderate is today. They don't take their jacket off and challenge people to fights. They don't run to the cameras over every single thing. They're not stunt people. They don't stand up and scream during the State of the Union. That's moderate. They take their crazy to the courtroom and try to ruin everybody's lives that way. So, okay. So we're on track. We can figure out more about him. There is more material to cover about him. We'll certainly do that. I will just, I guess, mention quickly, as I said, we're under the shadow of this mass shooting. I guess the best news so far is that last night when I was going to sleep, they were saying there were more people killed than they are saying have been killed this morning. That's unusual. We don't usually see that in the couple of hours following a mass shooting. But your basic nightmare, apparently still on the loose, this gunman, and also one of these roaming gunmen that goes places to different locations to do his shooting. So not clear what's going on there. No suspect in custody. Suspect hasn't shot himself, as is usually the case by this point in these things. Schools closed all over the region in Maine, by the way, and I saw some people making that point. Where are my conservatives who think schools should never close for any reason, and out there to say that it's tyranny that we have to close due to, well, the widespread possession and crazy use of weapons of war in the streets of America. But apparently they won't be out there making that protest anytime soon. But, well, to the extent necessary, we can, of course, we won't hide from the subject discussing, but it's not something we want to publicize either. But yeah, here we are in America. We're going to have to talk about other things other than the lunatic who went crazy overnight. And, but there's lots to examine there if you want to spend some time on it. Apparently, the shooter is a U.S. Army Reserve gun instructor, firearms instructor. So, one, he'll be very dangerous, of course. And two, that's another one of those guys that was a good guy with a gun up until yesterday. And then he became the worst kind of bad guy with a gun all of a sudden. And, you're just going to have to take the good with the bad, I guess, as is usually the case. All right. Greg Dworkin is here. We'll take the good from Greg Dworkin. We'll save the bad for 10 o'clock. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Hi. I will just mention for our listeners, the Portland Press Herald is a very good place to go. They have a live blog going on, live updates.
Yeah, the local papers have been on
the deadly Lewiston shootings.
Yes.
And their latest, or almost latest, and they're collecting information from all the news outlets all over Maine. But the Bath Iron Works is partially closed. They're telling people not to show up. Bowdoin College, not just Bates College in Lewiston, are on lockdown. And Bates College remains on lockdown as of 8:24 a.m. because they don't really know where this guy is.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, now he could be anywhere. But
so I don't know how long they've been in lockdown, but it's a long time.
I think all night. I read that last night, by late evening, they were locking down everything, businesses, schools, and that there's a sort of a general stay in your homes order going on. So basically all the things that, the radicals who don't believe in masks were certain should never happen again and was obviously tyranny when it was pandemic doing it. But now that there's actually a person you can hold accountable, I don't know, it's freedom to do this. Somehow, I don't know, I'm not exactly certain why but this is one flavor of hypocrisy out of many.
Right. So, again, for those who are unfamiliar with Maine, one of my favorite states, I love to vacation there. But here's some quick facts from the United States Census Bureau about Lewiston, for example.
Oh, okay.
It's the second largest city in Maine, next to Portland, which is by far the biggest. But it's got about 40,000 people there.
Okay.
And let's see, what else can we do here? White alone is 83%. And I'm looking for others. Black African American is about 7%. I thought there was but this is from memory, so I have to go check because I could be wrong. I thought there was a Somali presence there.
Well, I just learned about that, minutes ago myself. I don't know if this is where you were intending to go with it, but the way I learned about it was that people were saying that they were telling me how they learned about it, which was Tucker Carlson complaining about it.
Oh,
and saying
that's not good. Of
no.
course, quite relevant if it's accurate information. Where I was going with it is I don't know anything about the victims.
I don't either, and
I haven't said a thing about them, and so I just wanted to know if they were targeted.
That's a good question, and maybe we'll find out. And I think the police are going to be very cautious.
Was complaining about them. That's even a more relevant question.
Yeah, right. I think that's how it came to my attention, and I think it was supposed to direct me in that way. But I haven't seen any information that says that the victims were one or the other group of any kind. So.
It was just one of those factoids in my head, free floating without form, that you can't really explain where you got it from, and then you have to go and triple check and see if it's true.
Well, they said,
and I don't watch Tucker Carlson, so it wasn't from him.
I will tell you that if Tucker Carlson said it, I still can't tell you if it's true. It's probably not. But anyway, yes, apparently that's been the subject of some right-wing complaint from time to time, a lot. So, there's some real weird possibility that they may be related, but we hope. I don't know. We hope not. I think. I mean, I want to know who knows what to hope in that situation. I can't tell you. But Tucker Carlson's bad generally, so We'll just leave it at that for now. He's a bad guy.
The citizenship of Lewiston, Maine is 96.1% U.S. citizenship, so he's been going around shooting Americans, whoever this guy is.
Yeah, well, 96% anyway, if at random, so we'll see.
Well, again, a lot more to come. So, yeah terrible, awful, but more to come.
Well, we look forward to them finding this guy and putting everybody to, at ease up there. If that's ever a thing, no one's ever going to be at ease again up there.
At ease, put this guy to rest.
Yeah.
So, all right. Let me turn to the speakershipness thing.
All right. A much clearer picture.
I think there's still a lot more to go over there, but, some of it's scary, some of it practical.
Ken Buck.
Sorry. Yeah, but I think basically the reason he did it is the same reason Nancy Mace did it. Look, this guy is a super extremist when it comes to abortion rights. Mm-hmm. He literally thinks, and I mean literally, thinks that women should be barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen.
I guess
extremist when it comes to this. And Nancy Mace, of course, is all about, being moderate on abortion. So, of course, she wasn't going to vote for him, right?
Right. They should be in heels if they want to be and pregnant in the kitchen. So that's moderate.
Because he's willing to compromise.
Yeah.
So Nancy Mace, who's not a moderate, who's a fake moderate.
Well, that was Nancy Mace's idea.
Completely clear. Yeah. The other thing is the problem solvers caucus who just dissolved because, even their fig leaf doesn't exist anymore.
Okay.
Right. What's the reason for existing? So that they can unite with Democrats to solve problems? Bullshit.
I
voted
guess
for them 100%. The Republicans on that committee.
Yeah. Whoops. All right. Well,
caucus. Excuse me. They're a caucus, they're not official committee.
I can't believe you called it a magazine.
Yeah.
Instead of should have called it a magazine. You are supposed to call it a magazine, not a clip. Oh, see, we can't even get the wrong part right.
Right. So Larry Sabato quoted something from Politico and said, here's 55 things you need to know about Mike Johnson. Okay. Right. And then he said, you can read it if you want, but if you're pressed for time, here's a summary. He's a sincere far-right extremist kook, and now he's speaker and second in line for the presidency. That's it.
The other 54 are bad, but yeah. Well, he's right. He's a kook, but he presents a calm front, and I think that's what they were looking for.
Well, they were exhausted. They were just tired of it. I think that our summary was right yesterday.
I do too.
They were really, they hate working with Democrats so much.
Yes.
That even though he's an extremist that they don't like and puts the lie to all the reasons they claim they weren't voting for Jim Jordan. Mm-hmm. I mean, some of it may have been true at the time, but it wasn't the binding thing. Again, this is high school lunchroom politics here. My faction hates your faction. Some of the reporters have started to call Republicans in the House the five families, after the mobsters in New York City.
True.
I have seen because, that. There's the radicals and there's the hardliners, and they're not even the same faction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and many would say they are different parties entirely, but they do occasionally
For example,
agree to
Mike
meet
Johnson,
in the same room.
Who did he vote for when it came to Kevin McCarthy?
I don't know.
I think he voted for Kevin McCarthy.
Maybe.
He's part of leadership.
Yeah, he probably.
Matt Gaetz voted to get rid of Kevin McCarthy.
Although I guess I would.
Point being, Matt Gaetz is a radical, whereas Mike Johnson is a hardliner.
Yeah, in that vote, certainly the yay-nay vote, the one they actually did take that way, for vacating the chair, I'm sure he must have voted.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, where Nancy Mace voted with the radicals.
I was wondering
because she's not a moderate.
What did Mike Johnson do when they were voting on the other replacements? Did he vote for them when they were nominated?
Well, he probably voted for whoever was in leadership because, look, he was certainly going to vote for Steve Scalise. He's a Steve Scalise clone. He's Steve Scalise without the baggage.
Yeah, well, but as it turns out, he has that baggage, which is good news. He recorded it all. He has a podcast.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of that. And I want to go into detail something that Liam Donovan wrote for the New York Times, which I think is a really good piece. But before I do that, I want to mention this Daily Beast headline here, because I think it says it all. Democrats say they have no choice but to work with extremist new speaker.
What? How so? I mean, he's going to be the speaker.
He's the speaker. They're going to have to find common ground.
Well, right. Okay. They're not looking for ways to cooperate.
So both of that headline segment is correct.
All right. Well, the Washington Post is both as extremely wrong as possible and right in the end.
Yeah, and the funny thing there, I sent you the picture of it. Oh. You may recall on your show, I said, I don't even want to go into that editorial because it's stupid.
Yes.
Now, that's like a, fifth grade thing to say. You're stupid.
Yeah, well.
But Will Bunch tweeted yesterday after the Washington Post, after complaints, was forced to clarify. Let me read the clarification, because it's now at the top of that editorial. Clarification, a previous version of this editorial did not make clear the conditions under which Democrats could reasonably support a Republican speaker nominee. The editorial has been updated.
Oh, what were those conditions? Did they even say?
Well, they have to pick somebody reasonable.
Oh, okay. Oh,
so they put that in there, right? And Will Bunch retweeted
assuming
it
it's
and
reasonable.
Said, I don't think in my life I've ever seen an editorial getting an official correction because it was stupid. So I was right on that one too.
Yeah, I mean, it was just
stupid.
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of idiot is going to say, well, the Democrats should have worked with the Republicans? How? Republicans are refusing to work with them.
Yeah. The whole premise of this problem was that they refused to work with them. And,
if only Republicans were Democrats, Democrats could get along better with Republicans.
Right.
Well, so could the country.
Yeah. So that was I don't really know how I don't know how you work at a newspaper and kind of lose your place, lose your way that way. But for it to be the Washington newspaper, like this is supposed to be the local hobby.
Yeah, the local paper of record, right? So Will Bunch has been around the block a few times, not his first rodeo, whatever, cliche you want to use.
He's been around the rodeo.
And he says, I don't think in my life I've ever seen an editorial getting an official correction because it's stupid. And somebody said to him, you've been doing this a while. And Will Bunch said, yeah, 42 years in journalism.
Yeah.
And I don't think in my life I've ever seen an editorial corrected because it was stupid.
I don't
Until
know how
now.
It happened. I wonder if Jeff Bezos did anything in there. Probably not. I don't know. He's probably busy counting money. But I mean, I have no explanation for it. I mean, these guys are there every day for a living covering these two parties. It's almost as if they haven't been understanding or paying any attention to the two major parties in the United States of America for decades on end to write something like that.
Right. Matt Dowd says, the leader of the House GOP is anti-democracy, anti-freedom, anti-diversity, anti-separation of church and state, anti-LGBTQ, anti-Roe v. Wade, anti-science and gun reform, anti-do anything about climate, and the GOP just chose a Christian nationalist to lead them.
Yes.
So that's a pretty good summary.
Yeah. Right. All true.
Right. So it's all true. So that's why I thought the Liam Donovan piece was so relevant, because it's practical. Now, Liam is a Republican operative, but a relatively honest one. Mm-hmm. After spending 3 weeks plumbing the depths of a chaotic power vacuum, House Republicans seem to have finally found their man. And while the selection of Mike Johnson, a Louisiana Republican, as Speaker offers immediate relief from an exhausting internecine process, his elevation does little to address the underlying conflict that led to McCarthy's demise. While far from a household name, even by congressional standards.
Well,
and I sent you, I think yesterday, I forget whether I read it on the air, a funny comment about asking Susan Collins about him, and says, interesting, yes. I'll have to Google him.
Yeah, you sent it. I didn't get a chance to bring that one up, but widely circulated after that.
So that's what the Republicans are going to pretend. We don't know who he is. They know exactly who he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is one of those Marco Rubio things. He says he doesn't know. He knows exactly what he's doing.
That's true.
Mr. Johnson is well situated to bridge a divided conference, says Liam Donovan. As vice chair of the GOP conference, he's been an elected member of leadership without being a part of its core. He's a former chairman of the Conservative Republican Study Committee and a Judiciary Committee ally of Jim Jordan of Ohio. So he's not only Steve Scalise without the baggage, he's Jim Jordan without the baggage. So he brings them both into his persona.
Yeah.
But with a mild temperament that endears him to the establishment wing.
Exactly.
Because, you can say anything you want as long as you wear a tie and you don't wear a hoodie.
Yeah.
Right? He signaled an openness to the job, but resisted being caught up in the fray, thereby managing to avoid the sort of commitments that would limit his options. Two things about that. Everybody knew Kevin McCarthy would promise anything to get the job, therefore they didn't trust him.
Yes.
And people like Byron Donalds, also running, were so ambitious that they wanted to get a Capitol office the first day on the job.
Right.
I mean,
good ask.
Right. So, the point there is he wasn't seen as clamoring for the job which helped.
All right.
Because they're afraid of people who are overly ambitious.
Yeah, even though, that kind of describes all of them, but okay.
But you have to do it quietly, otherwise they don't trust you.
Yeah. So he was masterful at that. And I did listen to some of his podcasts, and he really does present a calm front. So to the extent they were looking for that.
A calm storm front, yeah.
Yes. That's
so
exactly
Mr.
right.
Johnson is not your prototypical party leader, and his mere candidacy sent many in Washington scrambling for their congressional directory. And in some ways, that was the point. A clean break from McCarthy. But while his unassuming manner, ideological credentials with conservatives, and initial goodwill present an opportunity, the same power dynamics that brought the last speaker to his knees remain on a collision course. So if this resolution seems anticlimactic, it speaks to the capriciousness of the entire exercise and why we can see it all over again. But why did they do this? First, the last month was a display of power in and of itself for conservative hardliners. Now, he's going to make this point because he's made it like over and over and over. Matt Gaetz feels like he's in a win-win position. If he can throw people like McCarthy out, he says, I win, I'm powerful.
Yeah.
And if he makes the motion and he loses, he says, it was the deep state, send me money.
Right.
So from his point of view, and that's basically what Liam is saying here, I'll summarize it for you. So in that particular situation, the radicals, the 8 that voted to oust McCarthy, feel like whatever they do, they're going to win. They don't care about running the government. They don't care about governance.
Yeah, that's true.
So in that sense, he also points out Mr. McCarthy's ouster came less than a year after the vaunted power-sharing agreement and arrangement. Now, people don't talk about it in those terms. They talk about it the way you and I talk about it, which is basically McCarthy gave up the speaker conference, so we knew the rules committee.
Yeah.
So we knew he was doomed from the moment he did that. But Liam calls it a power-sharing arrangement.
Well,
the deal's been cast in explicitly parliamentary terms and styled as a coalition within the party itself, with conservatives wielding institutional power in previously unthinkable ways. Mike Johnson's showing us why it was unthinkable. Jordan certainly was unthinkable. Mr. McCarthy handed over effective veto power over the floor via the Rules Committee. At its peak, with the coordination of the so-called 5 families and buy-in from the likes of the Freedom Caucus and its outside allies, House Republicans were able to pass a party-line debt limit package, but between the underwhelming experience of incremental success and an apparent preemption of the government funding fight, Mr. McCarthy's unlikely victory marked the beginning of the end for him.
Okay.
Because within weeks, many of the same hardline conservatives mounted a procedural blockade of government funding bills, and McCarthy's reliance on Democratic votes was cited as evidence of noncompliance with the January deal. The blockade, ensuing mutiny, you got to put this in military terms, was a practical acknowledgement that what's achievable under the current balance of power in Washington had proven insufficient to hardliners. Okay. So the experience of seeing their top 2 leaders taken down in succession by a sliver of their colleagues radicalized the middle against their own normative inclinations. So instead of allowing the hard right to dictate the pick, a symbiotic group of old bulls from safe seats, which is to say the committee chairs, appropriations and defense in particular, and vulnerable Biden district moderates there are no moderates, but I'm just saying, refused to reward the treachery, taking down a second nominee against the nominal will of the majority. So in other words, they took down Jordan.
Okay.
Then factional tit for tat consumed one would-be speaker after another. I'm telling you, it's high school lunchroom politics. And off-ramps, such as an elected pro tempore, were quickly foreclosed. So it became clear the majority of Republicans either had to accommodate the party's most intransigent voices or be faced with the unthinkable choice of turning to Democrats for help.
Oh, even though they had just immediately prior been responsible for governing the House of Representatives and done so successfully.
So I didn't think it was so unthinkable.
Yeah, right, that's
true. So if only by process of elimination, the outcome would be decided on the terms of the hard right, one for whom a betrayal narrative has its own utility.
Yes.
Gaetz said, if we end up with a more conservative speaker, we'll have achieved the objective of upgrading the position, and if it's not, you'll know why.
All right. I mean, that's
so basically, everybody in the conference knew that was coming, which is all to say the continuing functioning of government requires the same leadership behavior that felled Mr. McCarthy, and as long as the wing of the party that precipitated this month's bedlam maintains de facto veto power over the speaker, the incentives are going to be the same. So we may yet get to governing with Democrats, but, like Churchill said about America, you have to try everything else before you do the right thing.
I guess so.
So I thought from a Republican point of view, that was a pretty good validation of the way that we've been looking at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess so. It's a pretty good explanation. I did see also, by the way, I wish if I could find it, I'll be able to give credit for it. But somebody said, by the way, I'm just so tired of this cycle of stuff like, here it is. It's Jeff Charlotte, as a matter of fact, saying, I'm so frustrated with all the pundits who declared revenge of the squishes and return of the moderates for those few days where they were, striking back and blocking super conservative speakers. And then look, they all laid down one after the other and elected an arch conservative. They didn't hold out for so-called moderate Republican or working with Democrats or anything of the sort. They were just waiting for a chance for someone so low profile, nondescript, and even with a generic name like Mike Johnson to come along and then roll over for him. So they did.
Yeah, but again, short-term pain, long-term gain. Democrats immediately started contacting their Republican colleagues in places like New York, Molinaro, et cetera, and saying, okay, say goodbye to your seat.
Yeah. All right. Well, I agree.
You're not a moderate, and we're going to make sure that your constituents know it.
The polite thing to do is to say goodbye to your seat. All right, I'm a little bit behind on the music, but my soundboard wouldn't come up. So, all right, Here's our music.
Here's the music.
And we'll leave 10 seconds
they're already
earlier
starting to talk about getting rid of George Santos because they don't need him anymore.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know if they can. I think they'll find that they need him after all for one thing or another. Or probably the baby, at the minimum. Maybe they could put the baby in the seat. Or baby for speaker. Why didn't we do that?
Make the baby speaker.
All right. Well, okay. We'll be right back after this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show, or the Mike Johnson Show, or whatever you want to call it. Mike Johnson has a podcast of his own, by the way. I mentioned it already, and somebody brought it to my attention almost immediately. And it's a fascinating treasure trove that'll be picked over in the next couple of days. No particular effect. We're going to learn that he has said some outrageously ultra-conservative things, maybe even some things that'll get him in trouble with other MAGA people. But they'll, if you do it, release that information in his honeymoon period, they'll just, let it brush right past him. But it's out there, and it'll make for somewhat entertaining listening. And his wife is on it. She's the co-host, presumably barefoot and pregnant the whole time, but, co-host nonetheless. Podcast you can do in your kitchen. So
she has sore knees.
Yeah. Oh, right.
You want to tell that story?
I mean, I just from memory, I saw it fly by the other day. I guess in accepting the gavel, he said that his wife would have been there to congratulate him, and it's not because she's barefoot and pregnant at home necessarily, but that probably may have something to do with it. But she wasn't there because she had been on, I guess she was sore because she had been on her knees for several days prior.
Weeks.
Of course, weeks. Oh, I didn't realize it was weeks.
Several weeks prior.
Praying to God that something. Was she praying that he would become speaker or that the Republicans would get through it? I didn't look that far. It's just
it's another one of his other lines. Men aren't born, they're created.
Oh, I see. All right. Well,
we live in a biblical republic, he said. So that's what he's talking about. I mean, this guy really is an extremist right-wing nut. Yeah. So Rosalind Helderman has
what a nut. She's a nut.
Washington Post. New Speaker Mike Johnson's 2020 election denial could have 2024 implications. Remember,
well, of course,
the thing that the Washington Post left out of the article is Democrats cannot vote for an election denier.
Yeah.
Speaker. They can't. That's why Tom
Well, neither
Emmer
can
was
Ken
their
Buck,
choice.
but he did. But, all right, yeah. Ken Buck found a way. So can Democrats as problem solvers.
I can't figure out why Democrats won't, because they can't vote for an election denier.
It doesn't make any sense.
And then your own paper says new Speaker Mike Johnson's election denial could have 2024 implications. Can you put those two things together in your head, please? Washington Post editorial board, do you read your own goddamn paper?
No. They don't.
You're stupid.
Well, the editorial they wrote certainly was.
Stupid.
But also by implication, so were they.
The editorial was stupid, but the people who wrote it and allowed it to be published,
geniuses.
They're stupid too.
Yeah, okay. Well, it does have 2024 implications. It has more than implications. They elected him because he's laying the groundwork
Johnson
for
worked
doing
behind the
same
scenes to boost Donald Trump's efforts to stay in office through a long-shot court challenge. His role could matter after the next election. So Democrats will make that an issue. And I just want to point out Politico Playbook talking about what happened yesterday. Their subheader starts big capital letters, MAGA Mike's looming gavel whoops. And that's who he is, MAGA Mike.
Yeah. Well, that's one way to put it. It's catching on. It'll annoy him, I think, to some extent.
Good. House Republicans' 3-week-long nightmare is over, but for new Speaker Mike Johnson, the nightmare is just beginning. All smiles and standing ovations yesterday, which is annoying, but you got to just, work your way through it.
Mm-hmm. They were going to
That includes the pleasure of dealing with the egos, rivalries, and demands of a bitterly divided GOP conference, otherwise known as high school lunchroom, of negotiating with Democrats eager to flip the House and see him fall flat on his face. And let's not forget about the public scrutiny that's already ratcheting up on a man who's probably received more attention in the past 48 hours than he has in his entire career.
Yes.
1, government funding fiasco. 2, Santos saga. Now that the gavel drama is finished, New York Republicans say they'll move forward on a resolution to expel George Santos. New York Republicans are doing it because they fear being tarred with the same brush as Santos. Yes. Because people in New York are very aware of who Santos is, so they'll be the ones pushing it. The funny thing is, there may be enough Republicans to join with Democrats in doing this.
Join with how? What? Okay.
Right? While the effort will certainly appeal to lawmakers disgusted by Congress's own Frank Abagnale Jr.
Oh, okay. I know who that is.
Good. Tell us.
Well, I know him from the movie, the portrayal in the movie Catch Me If You Can. Have you seen that one?
No, I haven't. So
Leonardo DiCaprio. He was a forger, a serial
the guy
forger.
Who claimed to be everybody.
Yeah, and he would forge checks, and he claimed to be a doctor and a lawyer and a airline pilot. Yeah, all the things. A major grifter, and who then eventually, when caught, the FBI eventually cut him a deal and said, why don't you work for us and help us catch other counterfeiters? And he did it. But
in a narrow majority, Republicans can't afford to lose his vote. And that means Johnson could become the bearer of bad news and end up expending political capital early to try to save a man most of Congress loathes.
Loathe.
Right. Now, the threshold for expulsion is high. You need 2/3 of Congress to agree to it.
Right. You got to work
Even
with Democrats.
now, allowing such a vote will put Republicans in an awkward position of either voting to expel him or imperiling their governing majority by saving Santos, which is, of course, exactly what Democrats want.
Yes. I mean, it should be what they want to.
Expose him.
Yeah. All right. So.
Right. Number 3, unforgiving public microscope. Now people are finding out who he is. Kyle Cheney and Nicholas Wu have a revealing read up on the extent to which Johnson personally counseled Donald Trump on challenging the 2020 results, for example, and you're right. It'll be a big deal. Johnson's past writings on gay rights are also going to stir up questions, and a few odds and ends are bound to raise eyebrows. Johnson could face questions on his blaming post-Katrina looting, on secularism, liberalism, and legalized gambling, his moves to lobby local governments to crack down on adult video shops, and suggestions in a recent podcast he doesn't believe in the separation of church and state.
Right.
So, he is who he is. He's now the Democrats' new bogeyman. He doesn't know how to fundraise.
Oh. Well, I think
he's never done it. He's raised $450,000 in the past 7 years.
Oh. Yeah, well, he has not had any need of fundraising. He's in a safe Republican
his
district.
predecessor, by contrast, raised $15 million.
But I think he has access to the ADF's fundraising machine.
He may, but
lawyer,
a lot of these fundraisers are fiscal conservative social liberals. And whether or not they're going to give to somebody who is so extreme remains to be seen. These are the same people funding DeSantis and Haley and anybody else so that we don't have to have a Donald Trump.
Oh.
They got a lot of money they give to the Republican Party. They're going to give it to him?
They probably won't. I wonder whether he will be able to raise that money.
Well, some will, some won't. But I just, he'll have to prove he can raise money. Let's just put it that way. He has... it's again, our friend Liam Donovan said, it's the chicken and egg thing. Once you're speaker, all of a sudden you can raise stuff you couldn't raise before. But on the other hand, he may have specific issues with specific people, so that remains to be seen.
He could, it'll be interesting to see. But there'll also be a bit of a honeymoon period, and people will want to be on board. He's going to be the speaker. I better back him.
Right.
So,
Anyway, other things in the news besides him.
Nothing.
Let's just take a look at the other scandal sheet. Let's see what Punchbowl has to say about him. Brand new Speaker Mike Johnson has two brewing problems: House GOP moderates and Senate Republicans.
House GOP what's?
Yeah, it's a word that probably doesn't register.
I don't really understand.
I hear it, but it doesn't. There's a blank space
only
where
dogs
the word
can
is.
hear it or something.
House Republican moderates overwhelmingly backed Johnson, ending several weeks of internal fighting, but they're warning they aren't going to follow a right-wing agenda. The vow from center-right Republicans will have an impact across a range of issues, but there are two areas in particular worth watching: government funding and impeachment of Biden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah.
Okay. So if they don't agree with the impeachment thing, that would be sort of interesting. I think that the Republicans have sort of ruined their credibility on that, but we'll see how that works out. But, in addition to that, there's news on the strike front.
Ooh.
And before I do that, I want to remind people, Dave Weigel had a nice tweet about this. 1 year ago today, predictions are 100% certain that we'll have a recession. Bad news for Biden. That was a headline.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah. Well,
we didn't have a recession.
Certainty.
And actually, the economy is booming. As of today, there was a third quarter report. It was upwards of 4% growth. Just absolutely fantastic.
4.9% growth or something like that. It was
right. So what Biden needs to do, obviously, is say, when I say the economy is good and Bidenomics is working, what I mean is I kept us out of recession and the economy is growing, which is what we want. What you mean is that things cost too much. I get that and I understand. Here's what we're doing about it long term. But you have to understand, a lot of this is Donald Trump's fault because pandemic.
All right.
There's no question if he were a Republican, he'd be blaming Democrats for this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And
well, duh.
Of course. Right.
During campaign season, you get to do that. So there's that. Now, let's go fast forward to present time.
Yes, now.
And go to the just recent past and tell you how awful it is for Biden that, remind me who? Is on strike. Somebody's on strike. I'm not talking about the UAW right now. It's all the other strikes that was going to doom Biden because they were. But
well, let's see. There was a train strike,
for example.
Yeah.
Right? And there's others. There's
writers' strike.
There's a whole bunch of other strikes out there that actually resolved in favor of the workers. And guess what? It didn't hurt Biden. Well, today's headline: Detroit Free Press. Ford reaches tentative agreement with the UAW after 41-day strike.
What?
The tentative deal could relieve some pressure on Biden.
Oh. Well, he's taking a risk. something, right? That was
So,
your...
yeah, he's
What a
always
risk.
taking risks. What a risk. You know, he risked it on the picket line.
Mm-hmm.
He risked going to Ukraine. He risked going to Israel. Those are all true.
No,
He did take those risks.
He did.
So the idea that he's a senile old guy who just sits in the basement eating pablum echoes the Washington Post editorial board. It's stupid.
It is. All right. Well, there you have it.
This material a run on. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. And good. By the way, great job to all the union organizers who. I guess it would have been easy to give in, reading the headlines and seeing what a risk it was, and I don't want to, cause this problem for politicians I support. And they're right,
not
it's risky.
Just that. Listen, let's go back to the roots here. Let's go back to the basics and root cause. The head of the UAW made a decision that I'm doing this differently. I am not going to take on the automakers one by one. I'm going to take on all big three at the same time. Never been done.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Usually the pattern is like you pick on Ford, you get them to concede, and then the others come around.
I see. Interesting.
This time he struck all of them at the same time.
Well, why not?
And
that sounds
the
good.
way he was able to do that is he got himself a huge war chest so he could feed his members during the strike. He's going to get at least a 23% raise for them.
Hey, all right.
If not 25. And then it'll remain to be seen how he deals with the issue of electric vehicles and how that works out. But his decision to take on all three at the same time is working out for him. The strike is working out for him.
He took a risk.
He took a risk, and, it's going to work out for Biden, too.
25, maybe 25% raise. And he should, by the way, say, and you should maybe put 5% into your strike fund so that you can succeed again and still eat later on if necessary.
And then after that, I should go ahead and say, and thank you, President Biden, who was out here working with us. He's the first president in history to actually walk a picket line with us.
Despite
And he gets all sorts of credit, despite all the naysayers saying it was going to hurt him.
That's right. And the people who said he couldn't walk. And, of course, the prior presidents who said that they had special shoes that they were going to use even to walk on a picket line, but didn't. Just, But, I give him credit for it anyway because that was his VP.
Here's another thing.
Well, I'll mention it. He brought Joe Biden into top-level leadership, and now he's the president, and we can thank him for doing that. Why not?
Yeah.
Look, he was busy with some other things, and eventually his administration and its legacy did walk that picket line. So there you go. How about that?
How about that?
We'll
so I think that's actually pretty good.
Okay. I'll agree.
So let's go see if I could actually get some of the. Where was that from? I can't remember if that was from Politico or if that was from Punchbowl. But I'd like to read about the strike a little bit, but I don't know that we have time to go look it up right now. Jonathan Martin writes, a sage Democratic text me. Basically, Republicans are going to elevate a speaker who tried to overthrow the election and backs an abortion ban, the two issues we won on in 2022. What the hell are they thinking?
They want a rematch.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a good idea, but it is what people do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they also maybe they think they can win a rematch with a non-screamy leader, or
maybe they think.
I mean, it might be what they think. I don't really know.
Right. Jamie Dupre writes, a letter just read in the House says the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York subpoenaed documents from a House Intelligence Committee.
No. All right.
Subpoenas basically being complied with, wrote Chair Republican Mike Turner. No details are offered.
All right, that could mean anything.
I'm thinking, Senator Menendez, maybe you want to, call your office.
Maybe, or maybe you'd like to buy an RV.
With a gold bar.
Yeah, which you can do, and then you'll get the gold bar back afterwards.
Yeah.
And I think
or maybe
a lot
they
of
have
people
one of those deals where buy an RV, get a gold bar.
No, right.
Because he collects them,
He does, in his house.
From banks all over
for
the world.
safety, because they're easily portable. In case you need to flee, you can always stuff gold bars in your pocket and easily transport your wealth. But there have been a lot of people, by the way, maybe it's starting to look like it's possibly correct, saying that Republicans weren't piling on and calling for Menendez's resignation because they knew that eventually The same thing would be true of Clarence Thomas, and they just didn't want to have brought up the subject. But I don't know whether they think that much, but it's plausible because, yesterday, that was another story that came to light yesterday was, I guess, a Senate investigating committee came to the conclusion and reported that the loan that was supposedly made available to Clarence Thomas to purchase his $250,000 RV that he likes, he says, to drive around and park in Walmart parking lots, which I'm sure endears him to the locals to no end, with his $250,000 rig. The loan was, in fact, almost entirely forgiven. He never paid it. And, of course, that's a moral hazard. But at least he didn't get an education out of it, so it's okay to forgive that loan.
Right. I'm sending you a chart that our friend on Twitter, Jason Furman, put together because he's talking about this morning's economics report. It's been increasingly clear that GDP growth in quarter three would be very strong. And if you look at the chart, it is quite strong.
Yeah. All right.
But seeing the 4.9% annual rate is still amazing. Even the better, less volatile signal of final sales to private domestic purchasers was up at a strong 3.3% rate. As a result, the level of GDP is now slightly above CBO's pre-pandemic forecast.
Huh. Okay.
So we've actually caught up with the pandemic and passed it.
All right. And I guess
of what
that
they
means
said we were going to do.
Good news for CBO. Good work for them to predict when, I guess, prior to the pandemic, which would mean like 2019.
January 2020 forecast.
They figure, okay, so right in front of the pandemic. In fact, actually, we probably already had the pandemic,
the next couple months.
And we didn't know it yet. But
first cases were sitting out there, but we didn't know
that. And so they predicted where we were going to be in 2023,
almost
years
exactly.
later, and they got it right,
almost exactly
despite a worldwide pandemic.
Yeah.
Wow, it's almost as if the
almost
worldwide economy is, or that the economy is on autopilot, and there's nothing we can do about it. I don't know.
And this happened with inflation below what was generally expected in quarter three. Here's the history of core PCE forecasts and the actual.
I should get my economist down here to listen to this.
Okay, August 22, it was expected to be 2.6. In May of 23, it was expected to be 3.3. It's now 2.4.
Okay.
So the big driver of growth in quarter
numbers.
three, like much of the last 2 years, was consumer spending. It was up 4%. Spending on durables up 7.8%. Remember, this is an important detail here that I think he's glossing over, or at least wasn't the focus. It's not that he's glossing over it. People complain that things cost too much.
They do. You're right.
Consumer spending is up 4.0%, and
That's
spending
how they
on
know.
durables is up 7.8%.
Okay.
So they're complaining, but they're buying.
True. All right. Well, I'll have to get my behavioral economist here to figure this out. They are complaining that things are costing too much,
As
and
they
they're
spend the money
speaking
to
from
buy them.
experience. Yes,
Right.
I know they
can't
cost too
afford
much
this
because
stuff,
I
they
keep
said, as
paying
they
for
bought
it.
more.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess. Although then now the thing you
That's
have
why
to
they're
do is go
cranky.
look at credit card debt, I guess, and see how it's being financed. But if credit card debt isn't up tremendously, then that must mean wages went up somewhere along the line.
23% in some cases.
So, all right, we look around and see whatever. Oh, all right, well, what do you put a sticker on that says "I did that" if you are just talking about GDP growth?
Right. So government
I don't
spending
know.
was a
The
big
Fed's
part of it. The
building,
fastest
maybe.
growth was in defense spending, which is not surprising given what's going on in the world.
Yes, all right. Sure.
Comparing a few
not
components of GDP to pre-pandemic forecasts, you see consumption is above forecast.
All right.
Consumption is above forecast. Everything
All right.
costs too much, so I'm buying more than they thought I was going to.
Right. Or I'm stocking up before the prices rise again. That could
Unlikely.
be that. I don't know. I don't know what it is.
Nobody does that.
Well, I sometimes when look, now Coca-Cola is only $7.99 for a sleeve of 12. That's a great price compared to $9.99. Let me get 3.
Right. So none of this should probably
That's
change
pretty
policy
micro,
much,
though.
if at all. GDP data is mostly a useful summary of previously released data. And I would bet that real GDP growth is a little bit lower in quarter four, possibly by a lot, but that is very uncertain now. And I would be willing to bet that core PCE inflation is higher in quarter four than quarter three, but for now the Fed should remain cautious, keep rates high, but no reason to go higher. Well, that's good.
All right.
Fed keeps rates same is reasonably good news. Fed's lower rate would be better, but I don't think they're ready to do that. But you have to explain what Bidenomics is, and of course, this is way too complicated to do that. So basically, what you have to focus on is I not only kept you out of recession, it's amazingly strong in terms of where the economy is, as far as national production of goods and services. However, things still cost too much, and we're working on it.
Okay.
And it's Trump's fault.
All right, you could throw that in at the end. Maybe Bidenomics could say, well, I both put more money in your pocket, encouraged you to spend more of it, and preserved your right to complain about it, which you love to do. And I know that's your favorite thing about the economy. All the best possible economic outcomes under Bidenomics. You've got more money, you're buying more things, the economy as a whole is booming, and you can still feel like it sucks and tell your friends that it does. Well, okay. If that's your favorite pastime, complaining about the economy, go for it.
All right. And again, I told you I love Maine. Here's an example of why I love Maine. This is Samantha Montano on Twitter. Okay. There's a place, a little town called Lisbon. It's not too far from Lewiston.
All right.
And this is the tweet. I may have misheard this, but I was just watching an interview with the police chief in Lisbon. And I swear he said, we got reports of screaming and yelling, but it turned out to be just goats.
All right. That sounds rural and Maine-ish. Okay. Those goats, they can
Maine
do
is the
things.
place to go for goat soap.
That sound like, oh, yeah. Goats. All right. For washing goats?
Goat cheese.
I see.
Goat products.
Yes. That famous goat smell that you want in your soap.
Yeah, especially when it rains.
Yikes. But okay, we love the goat product.
You think
I don't love
sheep
goat
sweaters
milk,
smell when it rains? You should try goat sweaters.
Well, yeah, goats have those weird calls. I've seen or heard sound effects and seen the videos of these goats that sound like they're shouting, English language. It sounds like they're reading Moby Dick aloud even. It's just, but screaming. I could see how you might, think that was. What a horrible thing to have happen during a mass shooting. Oh my God, more victims. Well, it's just the goats screaming, Ed, or whatever it was, that one goat that we. In fact, somewhere here, this is actually a goat call. If I can find it, I know I stuck this somewhere. Oh well, maybe I lost it from all of the soundboard. But there's one goat that just sounds like it's saying "yeah" all the time. Yeah. But
there's a cat that people made music to all over the world, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
So it's a cat lapping up milk.
Oh, there it is.
It sounds weird. And so
I thought it was the auto-tuned.
So they got one of those virtual musicians from all over the world to back it up, and it's just a fantastic piece of music.
There it is.
Anyway, along those lines.
That's a goat.
That's a goat, eh?
Yep.
All right. There's a Twitter account called Feelings.
Feelings?
Yeah. There's a certain magic, they tweet, in watching the sunrise, a reminder that every day brings new possibilities. And that is coupled with a tweet from Tahir Chaudhry who says, yes, Leader Jeffries is stating that Mike Johnson, a member of the House Republican Conference, has a strong desire to criminalize abortion and advocate for a nationwide ban.
Okay.
So welcome to today. It's different than yesterday.
Yeah, well, that's true. It is different. Here's another sound effect.
That's bullshit.
Okay. Thought I would throw that in there for you. Okay. Well, that about wraps it up, I guess, for the day and for the week. And unless there's
one more
else,
thing I want to get in, because we do have another minute, according to my clock.
Yes, we do. I'm just, I don't know. I felt like there was a lull there, so.
Well,
maybe he wants to go. I don't know.
No more big, heavy stories. But
okay. The lightning round.
The financial news and the UAW strike news are all good news.
This is not
and
right.
I think after that, the Lewiston, Maine ongoing saga, I think we need some good news.
Yes.
Now, here's some neutral news. I don't know what it means. But I can guess.
I didn't know what the economic news meant, so now it's your turn.
Blue Virginia.
Yeah.
Per Virginia updates, only 6.4% of Virginia early voters are first-time early voters.
6.4%, presumably, of
those who vote early are generally habitual early voters. Repeat early voters, you might call them. That's what they call them. 60% Democrat, 34% Republican, 5% unknown. Okay. But first-time early voters?
Yeah.
Only 6%, so it's a very small portion of early voters.
Well, I have one in my house.
First-time early voters, 26.9% Democrat, 38% Republican, and 35% unknown.
Okay.
Okay. So the unknowns are way outstripping their usual 5%.
Well, they're first-time voters.
Okay.
How would they be known?
And because of that, basically, however you want to look at it, usually the Republicans are 34.7%. Now they're 38.5%. Okay. The Democrats usually dominate, but this time unknown party has such a big slice that it's eating into the Democratic margin there.
Maybe.
I think maybe. We don't know because they could be Democrats or they could be voting for Democrats. None of this tells us who they're voting for. But to me, the reason the Republican numbers are up slightly is because I think Youngkin and the Republicans have made a case for please vote early this time.
Yeah.
Don't listen to Trump.
That's fraud.
Don't stay home and vote on Election Day only, which is, for all of you Republicans, Wednesday of 2 weeks from now.
Yes, or 3.
But, for the early voters, there's only a slight improvement is what I'm trying to say, for all the effort.
Well, early voting is technically on already, of course, and has been for a while in Virginia. But I will note, I guess, the report from the ground here is while early voting starts way early, like a month in advance.
It only picks up steam now.
Yeah. And the reason, I mean, at least for me, from my personal experience with it, is early voting is only sort of technically available. It's there, but in order to cast an early ballot, I got to pick up and drive out to the county seat and go to the elections office and stand in line and run the gamut of all the people who, the yard signs and the handout of the sample ballots, et cetera. I have to go way, way out of my way during business hours only. Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, I can go all the way out to the county seat to vote. But starting, I think, this past Monday, they now have the satellite offices open, so you can actually
there's
go.
Also vote by mail, and I would just add in Connecticut, what you do is you sell Girl Scout cookies, so like everybody comes.
Ah, yes. And in Maine, you sell goat products, I guess. Yell at people.
Yep.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, we're up to speed on that. Thanks, Greg, and we'll see you next week. Or come on tomorrow.
More early voting stuff.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. A little bit of disconnecting noise just to add some computer-type ambiance to all of that. Okay, so let's see, where did we leave off? There's plenty to catch up on, and I don't know. Well, luckily we have Friday still available to us. And once again, I want to remind you just how weird goats can sound. Yeah. That is actually a goat, that's not Patrick Starfish from SpongeBob SquarePants, which is exactly what it sounds like, but apparently one of those goat calls. And then, of course, there's the crazy one. I never did grab this one. There's the goat that screams like it's shouting out for a person named Ed. I mean, it really sounds like this screaming, Ed! And, well, anyway, so I could see how you could mistake such things. Apologies to goat soap fans, but goats are very smelly animals. A lot of animals are pretty smelly, but they have a particular smell that I just can't take. When it comes to goat milk, or goat cheese, forget it. I'm not a big cheese fan anyway, so I'm not the best, measure of all of this. Anyway, so let's see. Other things that I need to share with you. Well, let's see. Before we depart entirely from the subject of Maine, I will say that something has come across the social media transom. I am not certain of its provenance or how much I trust it. Actually, the provenance is that it comes from Newsweek. So I'm sure of its provenance. I'm just not sure how much I trust Newsweek. But in relation to what we were speculating recklessly about earlier, and Tucker Carlson's weird fixation on Lewiston, Maine because of its allegedly because of its Somali population, which I guess is also alleged, the fact that there even is one. We have this, and let's see, Stephen Monticelli, who I'm not familiar with, but a personage on Mastodon. Blue Sky. Tweeting, Xing, Skyping, whatever the hell they call it, skeeting. Here we go. The main mass shooter guy who, well, for the time being, we'll pretend we don't publicize the names, etc., had a Twitter account that has since been scrubbed, but an archive reveals that he liked a lot of posts from far-right media figures and politicians, including content published by Donald Trump Jr. and Tucker Carlson. So I don't know whether he was into Tucker Carlson because Tucker Carlson, well, I mean, clearly because he's a white nationalist, that probably is true, but did it have anything to do with his fixation on Lewiston? Was he particularly moved by what he had to say about Lewiston, or was he just moved in general by the white supremacist agenda that Tucker Carlson represents, or what? I don't know, but it's looking like pieces are falling into place if you want to construct a theory out of this. But I don't know how solid the theory is going to be in the end. But all right, because people will be talking about it, you should know what this is about and where it's going. And maybe you'll spot something that will firm it up, for all I know, or blow it up, for that matter. I don't know if I care a great deal which direction it goes from there. All right, let's see. So some other things to catch up on. There's some stories we've ignored, but let me do something more about Mike Johnson that I promised I would save for later because it gets a little bit weedy. First of all, let me also express appreciation for Alexandra Petrie's piece in the Washington Post that ran under the headline, "In a total betrayal of principle, Mike Johnson accepts election results." What do you know? There was no fraud in his election. Everybody can feel safe and sure about that. And look, I know that they vote out loud one at a time, in person, on camera, but we don't know whether any of those votes were actually cast by AI. We don't know whether any of those votes were actually cast by holograms, that the footage from C-SPAN was hijacked and edited like they faked the moon landing, yikes, or something like that. Well, no. Oh, by the way, I mean, this won't matter, but this is parody. All those things are stupid and not true, and if you look them up on the internet at a real source, like maybe, I don't know, Wikipedia or something, which, by the way, the teachers will say, that's not a real source, and it isn't. I understand why, but look at I don't know, pick whatever you trust. All those things, if they're for real, will tell you, no, they landed on the moon. No, the election went just as eventually certified, Joe Biden won it, etc. But YouTube, every time I mention that there are election deniers or other conspiratorial-minded weirdos out there, YouTube thinks, oh, it's content about conspiracy theory. This podcast is about conspiracy theory, and I will append the following warnings to it. Have I mentioned this already on the air? I keep mentioning it on social media. But if you go to YouTube to find the, I guess technically they're classified as videos, even though there's no video element. But if you play our podcasts there, or even hover your mouse over the podcasts, in any episode, at least recently, where we mention election denialism or whatever, or even when we're making clear that stupid and unfounded, they append a warning of sorts that if you put your mouse, if you hover over and if you threaten to play our video of our podcast, what will pop up is a link to the Wikipedia article on the 2020 elections that patiently explains that Joe Biden did win and he was eventually certified despite all of the nonsense, which I think they think is going to foil me in some way into stopping. Don't discuss this stuff anymore, except for me, it's like, well, that's a backing reference for all the things that I told you. So why would I object to your removing that from my videos? I don't. Or why would I object to you appending it to my videos? I don't. Go ahead, keep them there, put it on everybody's video. But that's YouTube. Thanks for the algorithm. It's awesome. job you're doing with the AI stuff. Anyway, so I didn't read Alexandra Petrie's article, but I did read the headline, and the headline is funny. So there you go. And it's probably worth a read because, most of the things she puts together are both funny and worth the read. Sometimes because they're funny, they're worth the read. But the other thing that I as I mentioned, Mike Johnson has a podcast, and he does it with his wife. I mean, the podcast. I mean, the other thing is true too. I think. I don't know. He would not want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. But is her name Kelly? Kelly Johnson, maybe? Anyway, the dynamic is about what you would expect. It is a forum for Mike Johnson to say that Mike Johnson is a genius and a constitutional scholar, and for his wife to agree and to say how smart he is and how much she loves him because of how smart he is. But also, she's heard a little bit about politics too. I mean, she has some things to say. She doesn't do nothing on the show. She comes off as an astute observer of a false brand of politics that's going to mislead her in every possible way. But she's paying close attention to being misled. That's the important part. Anyway, so let's see. I don't remember who brought to my attention the fact that he had a podcast. Maybe I do. I don't know. Or maybe Sarah Posner. Yeah, was certainly talking about it. And then I saw Josh Marshall point out that episode 12 of his podcast, and it's now at or around 100 episodes. It's pretty prolific. They're half-hour episodes. So, piker, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, so he's got about 100 episodes. Episode 12 is The Truth. It's titled, I think, The Truth About January 6th. So I listened to all half hour of that one. And it was important to do. I can't transcribe it for you, but I can discuss it a little bit. But as it turns out, there is a New Yorker piece that, who pointed this out? Maybe, could have been, Peter Segal pointing out that one of the things that just a proof of what kind of person he is, or maybe this was maybe it was something he said first time in history that somebody who's serving as speaker was foolish enough to agree to speak to Isaac Chotiner of the New Yorker, who would rake him over the coals and probably expose him. But Mike Johnson is definitely the kind of person who thinks that he's smarter than any interviewer and will take any, and so this is an opportunity. It will take any interview opportunity out there, no matter their reputation for their being able to, from a liberal or democratic or progressive, or neutral for that matter, point of view to, I can corner Mike Johnson in logic and force him to admit something. In many cases will weasel out of it, but he will always go into it with the belief that he can outsmart that person. So we'll see. This is actually from December 15th, 2020. So prior to January 6th, but in the run up to January 6th, he's already talking about this stuff because he's one of the legal masterminds behind the idea of opposing and overturning the election results. Although he's very careful in the podcast, that's episode 12, to draw some lines that is supposed to separate him from the worst of the worst. And I guess before I even read the New Yorker piece, although this is a good substitute for, I think, listening to the podcast, because I think he'll try to make the same points there. Well, maybe we should just do that. And if he doesn't refine, if he doesn't state these points from the podcast, I can restate them for him. But along the way, of course, there will be commentary. But this is a Q&A with Isaac Chotiner. Why Representative Mike Johnson thinks that the election isn't over. December 15th, 2020. Mike Johnson, basically a no one, though he's in the minor ranks of Republican leadership at the time. Last week, Isaac begins, and that would have been, like December 7th, a date which will live in infamy, but for a different reason. But also, it was about the time that Mike Johnson was saying dumb stuff. Oh, I'm sorry. It wasn't him. It was Ken Paxton saying the dumb thing, because last week it says the Republican Attorney General of Texas, who was later impeached but acquitted, with support from Republican attorneys general in 18 other states, filed briefs urging the Supreme Court to overturn the results. Overturn. It's important to note that overturn the results of the election in 4 swing states that favored Joe Biden. The lawsuit, which called the vote illegitimate, claimed that the state's legislatures, rather than the voters, should choose the electors. And I guess I'm going to have to intersperse at this point, just to be sure, because otherwise I'll forget the point from the podcast. Just one sentence and I got to stop, right? So as they say, as Isaac puts it here, this would overturn the results of the election. Mike Johnson holds himself out as separate from that and insists that his activities on January 6th would not have overturned the election. And that's the big difference between him and everybody else, including the rioters. And by the way, he reserves time at the end of the podcast to supposedly condemn the rioters. And actually, this could make trouble for him with MAGA, possibly, if they, pay attention to things or aren't just giant hypocrites. But because they are, it won't become an issue. But the quote at the end of his podcast is, let's see, I got to scroll back a little ways in my my own timeline here. But he says, all conscientious Americans have and should condemn in clear terms the terrible violence of January 6th. He says it was gut-wrenching for all of us, right? And the criminals who participated in the storming of the Capitol, shamed our nation and its traditions, and there's no way around that. Now, he's already secured the votes of the likes of Murdery Trader Green and others who insist that all January 6th defendants and convicts alike are political prisoners, should be pardoned, etc., etc. So he has staked out this very different territory, which he might just abandon, or he might never have to abandon it because the hypocrites will just say, yeah, well, I like him anyway. Like Ken Buck, right? So if Ken Buck can promise earlier in the day that he still won't vote for any people who voted not to certify the Electoral College votes, and then just reverse himself within hours and do this, then certainly Murdery Trader Green can manage the same level of hypocrisy. But he sets himself apart, and one of the reasons, very flimsy, is that he says, well, I was only challenging at the time in the House of Representatives, though it's not clear whether he was going to challenge more. He said, I was only challenging what? Arizona, maybe, and Pennsylvania. And together, they didn't have enough Electoral College votes to reverse the election and to elect Donald Trump. But I don't know. What was the, I guess I have to check. Well, now I should go to Wikipedia and check the 2020 election article. What was the Electoral College vote in the end? When they, did it right. Well, let's see. Here's the number. 306 to 232. And you need 270. So I think what he's saying here is that Arizona and Pennsylvania combined did not have enough to, if they reversed them and sent them to Donald Trump, declare Trump the winner, not by themselves. Let's see. 232 for Trump. And if he got Arizona, which is 11 electoral votes, and Pennsylvania, which is 20, then he would have 263 electoral votes and not enough to get him to 270. And just, I get it's a zero-sum thing, isn't it? If 306 for Biden minus the 11 and the 20 gives him 275. So, had they either reversed the results of Arizona and Pennsylvania, or had they thrown out Arizona and Pennsylvania entirely, If they had just thrown them out, it would be 275 to 232. Biden's still president because he's still got the 270 that's required. But that's only if you ignore the question and the probable answer of, well, would you have done that with more states? There's also the possibility that he might have thrown out more electoral votes such that neither candidate ended up with the 270 majority, and then it throws the election to the House, at which point the predetermined outcome based on the state delegations would have been Trump probably being elected president. And wink, wink, not my fault. I was just enforcing the Constitution. Now, we'll get to why he thinks he's enforcing the Constitution next. But he's differentiating himself. He says, I was just taking the legal route. Sort of. Not suing in court as, Greg will allow for, but rather using congressional procedure. It was his view that we had a legal duty. We had a constitutional and moral duty, having taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, to enforce every single bit of it. His theory will become clear, I think, in the Chotiner piece, why he thought there needed to be a challenge. But I just wanted to point out to you that he still holds himself out. Like, he'll say it's false what Democrats are charging me with about being an insurrectionist. No, I wasn't joining the rioting, and I condemn the rioting. Well, yeah, but you were voting to overturn the election results. Well, no, I was voting to muddy the election results by throwing out the results from 2 states so far. But then there was a riot, and it blew the whole thing up, and I never got around to challenging the other states. So we'll never really know whether I was also going to overturn the election results. But the record as it stands is of me trying to overturn the results in Arizona and Pennsylvania. It means I have no regard for the voters in Arizona or Pennsylvania, and therefore by extension anywhere else either. But by the time you froze the record, I hadn't yet threatened to reverse the results of the election, so you can't pin that on me. So that's some supplemental information. So it describes here the efforts of the Attorney General of Texas trying to overturn the results in 4 swing states that favored Joe Biden. And with Arizona and Pennsylvania bringing him down to 275, I imagine 2 more states would, in fact, have overturned the results of the election. Now, that's Ken Paxton, not Mike Johnson. So where do we stand? The lawsuit, which called the vote illegitimate, claimed that the state's legislatures, rather than the voters, should choose their electors. That is, Mike Johnson is in agreement there. The whole of his podcast was about his theory as to why, and we'll see whether it's laid out here. The claim garnered the support of more than 60% of House Republicans who signed an amicus brief. Whose brief was it? Why did they sign it? Mike Johnson. But on Friday evening, the Supreme Court declined to consider the lawsuit, saying that Texas had no standing in the matter. Standing. Justice Samuel Alito, in a statement joined by Clarence Thomas, who was at that point enjoying a free RV, as well as free travel around the world, wrote that the court had a responsibility to take up the lawsuit, but that he would not, quote, grant other relief. Okay. So on Monday, way back when, the Electoral College met, that would have been December 14th, with a majority of electors voting for Biden. This doesn't mean that the 126 Republican House members who signed on to the Texas case are ready to accept Biden's victory. I recently spoke by phone with Representative Mike Johnson of Louisiana's 4th District. A strong ally of the president, Johnson emailed his Republican colleagues asking them to join the amicus brief and telling them that President Trump was, quote, anxiously awaiting the final list. Be on it or be on the S list, right? Johnson, who won his 3rd term in November, maybe, allegedly, unless there was widespread fraud, is the chairman of the Conservative Republican Study Committee and the vice chair of the entire House Republican Conference. Low rungs of leadership. Before taking office, and we read about this yesterday, Johnson worked as an attorney in the conservative Christian movement, representing organizations such as Freedom Guard. I don't know that one. That one sounds like an antiperspirant, honestly. And Alliance Defending Freedom, which may be misstating the case a little bit, worked as an attorney representing Alliance Defending. He worked for Alliance Defending Freedom. He was a staff attorney there, if I understand correctly. Johnson has twice defended Louisiana's same-sex marriage ban before that state's Supreme Court, first in 2004 and again in 2014. During our conversation, which has been edited for length and clarity, we discussed why the Supreme Court wouldn't hear the case, the next move for Trump's supporters. Remember, this is December 15th, 2020. As it turns out, the next move is to riot and smear feces on the walls and let the QAnon shaman occupy the chamber. But anyway, what they'll be discussing, what Johnson has learned about Trump's dedication to the Constitution. Nothing, because there isn't one. So what do we got on tap here? Why did you organize this effort, he asks. Well, the simple issue raised in our brief was that it was necessary for the Supreme Court to address this one question that hangs over the election cycle this year, and that is, what is the meaning of the Constitution's Electors Clause, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2? Well, Chotiner asks, it didn't come up in the debates, but it was the underlying issue, the debates of the case. I guess, of Paxton's case. Didn't come up, but it was on the underlying issue. And he says, Johnson, it was the underlying issue. So many people were focused on the trees. When they zoomed out and looked at the forest, that was a cause of so much of the concern. We wanted the court to resolve it, not just for the current election cycle, but for all elections in the future, as if he would regard precedent as binding. I was a constitutional law attorney and litigator for 20 years before I got to Congress. I caution you, it appears to be true. That appears to be the record. But, I'll just caution you that Jenna Ellis, and as a matter of fact, Ann Coulter both of them say that they're constitutional scholars. So, you be wary of that claim, but he appears to have the record to back it up. I mean, he's wrong about this stuff, but it was constitutional law that he was wrong about. So I'll grant him that. Now, he says, we used to debate about the nuance of meaning, but this is arguably some of the clearest phraseology in the Constitution itself. It says it is only state legislatures that can set the rules for choosing electors, right? This is the first time most of us heard of independent legislature theory or independent state legislatures theory, even though, the case that was pending then about it from North Carolina and that did get decided is about a very different use of the same theory. This is a very different branch of this theory. But he says it's the clearest phraseology in the Constitution. It says that only state legislatures can set the rules for choosing electors. Because they denied the case on standing, we now have this lingering question mark over this really important interpretation of the Constitution. Many people will contend in the years to come, as he will next year, because of the court's silence, it's okay now, after 2 centuries, to play fast and loose with the rules. I say he'll do this because he's playing fast and loose with the rules right now. I'll have to take a brief pause on this one. And, the break's coming up, so it might be a good place to do that. So this clearest language in the Constitution, I got to raise one basic black letter problem with his interpretation. He says it's the clearest phraseology in the Constitution, and it says only state legislatures can set the rules for choosing electors. Remember, what's he talking about here? The Constitution's Electors Clause, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 1. Here it is, Article 2, Clause 2. Clause 2 says, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. What number? The number should be equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in Congress, right? So that's the Electors Clause. It says very clearly that only the legislatures may set the rules for choosing the electors. How does he put it? I'm sorry, I should just read his quote here. It is only state legislatures that can set the rules for choosing electors. Unfortunately, this clearest phrasing in the Constitution doesn't say that. The word rules, which is, I would argue, pivotal to what he's claiming here, does not appear in this clause. They shall appoint in such manner as the legislature shall direct. Now, you know, because we've been over this a number of times in the last couple of days, and we went over this years ago in December at the time, and this has been tested. This was the argument in federal court in Wisconsin, that the new COVID rules that allowed for drop boxes, early voting, mail-in balloting, different rules for the acceptance and the validity of mail-in ballots, etc., because of COVID, all of those things, it is his claim. Oops, I got to get our music ready for this. We're a few seconds late. But Johnson's claim, essentially, and none of this has changed, and so it will be perfectly, to the extent it was ever valid, it will be equally valid in 2004, 2005, 2024, 25. His claim is that any rules that have anything whatsoever to do with how elections are conducted, how the votes are gathered, how the votes are counted, how the votes are validated, all of that has to be done by the legislature. What color are the ballots? What kind of pens can you use? No.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. All right, it was a little awkward that we had to take the break in the middle, but yes, but no, essentially, is what I'm saying here. Yeah, as you've heard a number of times, Johnson's view and the Republicans' view of the independent state legislature theory with respect to what happened in the 2020 election is that this clause, that each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors, means that anything that has to do with the election of, or with the selection, I should say, the appointment, really, to use their phrasing, of the electors must be done by the legislature directly, and no other anything that pertains to the manner of elections they view can be done by anyone other than the legislature. So in other words, if the paper stock of the ballot changes at the direction of the Board of Elections, if the legislature doesn't specifically act saying this shall be the paper weight, and this shall be the color, and this shall be the type of pen that you can use, and this is the type font of each of the ballots, and not only the question of can you use drop boxes, but how big should the boxes be? Do they need to be bolted to the ground? What color should the boxes be? Any of those things is challengeable under Johnson's theory unless the legislature has said it. And then if you use a box that's, 2 feet by 3 feet, did the legislature say you could do that? If not, then all the electors from that state are illegally and unconstitutionally selected. The legislature has to direct it because that's what we think manner means. But I think different. And the federal court in Wisconsin thinks different. And 200 years of practice have been very different. I think that the state shall appoint in a manner, such manner as the legislature may direct a number of electors means how, by what methodology, in only one sense, will the electors be chosen? Will, as is available to them as an option, the state legislature appoint them directly, or shall we choose to have an election among the general populace in the state, the winner of the popular vote being awarded those electoral votes? Is that how we'll choose them? And that's the practice, and that's always been the practice. The legislature can direct that there be an election. The legislature can direct that they appoint them directly. The legislature can, and by the way, it doesn't necessarily mean an open vote of the body of the legislature to appoint them either. They could, if they want to, presumably because they have this power, assign that duty to a committee that may or may not vote behind closed doors. I don't know. Somehow they got to get the results to the body and verify it, I guess, but anyway, they can do it any way they want. They can appoint the electors. They can call for an election and choose them that way. They can do, we've said it before, they can coin toss. They can draw lots. They can do whatever they want. They could have a national lottery. Who knows? Well, I guess it wouldn't be national. It would be a state lottery. But it could be any methodology. But the question is, in what manner will you appoint the legislature? I'm sorry, not the legislature, but the electors. And, maybe it's a genuine difference of opinion, he may say. And so what else can we point to textually about this? The state shall appoint these electors. So ultimately is what's happening here. They're not elected. We say, well, remember, we don't elect the president here in this country, not directly. The Electoral College does that. Well, we don't even elect the Electoral College directly. The state legislature determines the methodology, but they appoint the electors. So they're not necessarily elected. And then, in fact, they're not actually elected. We nominate by statewide election who we think ought to be appointed, but I guess it's possible that Mike Johnson would probably agree. Well, he thinks that it's fair game for the state legislature to say, well, who do you think, people of Arizona, who do you think we should appoint as electors? And they say, we think you should appoint the electors who will vote for Joe Biden in the Electoral College. And the state legislature, in Johnson's view, can say, well, we think otherwise. We think that you've done a poor job in doing your voting, whether we think it's illegal or there was irregularities. They can say, to hell with what you said. We're going to revoke your right to have an election, or we'll recognize your right to have an election, but choose someone else anyway. I don't know. They could do that. I mean, that would make them extraordinarily unpopular. Many of them would lose their next election, or maybe, they would be jabbed with pitchforks or tarred and feathered. I don't know. But, can they do it? Well, according to Johnson's interpretation, they certainly can. And I guess now that I look at it, maybe that's something they think they can try to do. But I think that, for the most part, I think the common sense rules of fair play, and Johnson invokes common sense throughout his argument. Oh, the common sense thing to do is this. Well, the common sense thing to do is to say, you choose your manner and then you stick with it. And if you don't like it, you can choose a different one next time. But more than that, I argue, manner has to do with how the legislature decides the electors will be designated, appointed. Will it be us alone? Will it be the people voting and are taking their suggestion? Will it be some other methodology? But what it is not is the rules. It definitely doesn't say the rules of how the selection will be made. So if the legislature, I argue, opts to have an election, as all 50 states have done, and the District of Columbia and other territories, to the extent that they have electoral votes, they all opt for elections. That's the practice these days, right? So once they've chosen the manner, i.e., a general election, that's the end of the direct responsibility and authority of the state legislature. Now, they can choose to give themselves more authority, I suppose, by deciding how elections are structured in their state and whether or not there will be an elected statewide board of elections, an appointed board of elections, or any board at all. But generally speaking, in all 50 states and the territories and the districts, they have said there's too many rules and regulations for us to bother ourselves with as a legislature. We will delegate that authority to a board of elections. So questions about whether or not this or that color of paper can or should be used. Questions about what font they will use, how big the print should be on a ballot, whether or not they'll use electronic vote counting machines, whether or not they'll use electronic balloting machines, whether or not which brand, they'll buy, and what the rules are for date of postmark, or what their mail-in ballots will be like, or what their procedures for requesting a mail-in ballot or other absentee ballot, or whether there'll be ultimately eventually drop boxes, extended voting hours, etc. It's early voting, what days will be allowed for early voting, what days won't. All of that is delegated to someone else who can spend all of their time on this stuff. It was never the view of the founders or anyone else that the legislature, the state legislature, would have to paralyze itself with every single detail of the methodology of the election. The manner of selection, the manner of appointment, yes. The methodologies of election, if that is the option you choose as to the manner, no. But his whole argument rests on that. He does a half-hour podcast about how smart he is for being the only one to understand that 200 years of jurisprudence and practice about this are completely wrong, and what the founders really meant by manner of appointment is rules surrounding elections. 3 different words. Manner of appointment, that's what it says. Meaning, according to Johnson, individual atomized rules for conduct of elections as the manner. That's really, really, really far removed from what it actually says. But he says it's the clearest constitutional text there is. It is not. He says we debate the new. Actually, it is pretty clear. I mean, I guess you could say that. But his view of it is certainly not the view anybody else has been taken, and they have tested it. He says they haven't. They have. Federal court in Wisconsin was presented with this, and he said, no, that's not what it means. Not, he didn't. Johnson said it is what it means. The judge said, no, it isn't. So there you go. And here he tries to now make his argument. What happened in 2020, occasioned by COVID, is that public officials, in many cases well-intentioned ones, tried to expand the way we do elections. Now, okay. But the key point is that so much of it was done by other kinds of officials, governors, secretaries of state, judges, not the legislatures themselves. The framers were very careful about making that safeguard in the Constitution, and when you deviate from that, it opens a Pandora's box to this kind of chaos. Except it will always stay open, and by the way, nothing has been done to change this. There's nothing in Johnson's interpretation of this that has changed a whit since 2020, or January 6, 2021 for that matter. He can still claim under this theory, well, this state that voted for Biden used a color of paper for its balloting that it nowhere in the annals of the legislature thereof says is authorized. Therefore, it is unconstitutional, and we rule their electoral votes null and void. That's his theory. Except, as I said, he says, well, it says that they determine the rules of the election. No, it says they determine the manner of appointment, which is 2 different things. Manners aren't the same thing as the rules, and appointment isn't the same thing as election. The rules of how you conduct an election will tell you what the legislature in the end, if it has selected the manner of appointment to be an election and how it's conducted will determine the recommendation of the electorate to the state legislature. But it is still the job of the state legislature to honor that choice and appoint the electors preferred by a majority of voters in the state. It's a different stage of the game, and it has different rules and different meaning. He's intentionally conflating all of this stuff so that he can claim, well, all of these things that had to do with COVID, like, for instance, they weren't specifically authorized by the legislature. Yeah, in many cases, that's true. So what? Well, that's the manner of appointment. Well, he'll say that's the manner of the election. Well, no. We're concerned with appointment, not election. And manner isn't rules. Manner is, what's the methodology? Who will we turn to for advice, if any, for who we should appoint as our electors? We opt to allow the voters to speak on this? Fine, go ahead and do that. Does it mean that they have to regulate every step of the way of how the voters will be asked? No, it doesn't. It simply says you choose. Election, appointment, something else, what's the manner going to be? And then after that, how you execute the manner, that is the rules by which you execute that manner, are a different question. And it doesn't say anywhere in the Constitution who will set the rules once the manner has been determined. It just doesn't say that. It doesn't. You're wrong. It's fancy. You can dance around it. You can confuse the terms, electors, elections. Everybody knows we have elections or appointments for this, that, and the other thing. And no one discusses the weird options like the coin toss, et cetera, et cetera. But that just makes it easier to conflate all of this thing. The manner is rules. It is, right? It is. Everybody says that it is. It isn't. It isn't. I mean, for black letter law originalists, if they meant rules, they could put rules. I mean, let's go back an article. Right at the beginning somewhere of Article 1, what do they say here? I don't even remember what article it's in anymore because it's just not top of mind anymore. But let's see. Oh, by the way, in Article 1, Section 4, when they talk about how senators and members of the House will be elected, the time, place, and manner of holding elections for senators shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But again, no use of the word rules. But there is something in here somewhere, as I recall. I think, is it in Section 6 when they talk about the actual, use the word rules, isn't it? Where they each house shall choose their own rules of procedure, which is, the basic separation of powers issue that keeps them independent as a federal legislature. But now I'm not able to find the is this it? No, this isn't it either. But okay, I am pretty certain somewhere that they used in this, when they give each house the opportunity to choose its own rules of procedure, that they use the word rules. And I don't know, I'll find it, and maybe you can find it. You can skim while you're not doing a radio show. But anyway, the point is, if it's in there, and I guess I'm not positive that it is because I haven't brought it to in front of my eyes, they know the word rules. I'm pretty sure that the founders understood the word rules, but they chose not to use it, even though in the same document they use it differently. So ask yourself the question, why do they use rules here and use manner here and here? But Mike Johnson says, well, here and here where they use the word manner, they really meant rules. And even though they knew the word rules, they refused to use it just to trick you, because they really meant rules. And why they use rules here instead of manner, again, just to keep you on your toes so that you would know later, 200 years later, that I was right about this stuff. So, okay, back to the interview, just because we're obviously going to spend our whole day on Mike Johnson here. The Supreme Court now has many conservative justices. We're back to Chotiner here. And 3 of them were appointed by President Trump, all of whom you supported. And Amy Coney Barrett is a friend of yours, right? Oh, of course. Yeah. So, why do you think they didn't go along with this or see it the way you do? And why is the Trump legal team's record so bad in lower courts? Good question. I was a young volunteer in a big election lawsuit in Louisiana in the late 90s. What I learned is that election fraud is hard to prove. You have to have precision and to do it in a very short time frame. And you have to have evidence beyond refute and affidavits by witnesses that have credibility. I think the Trump campaign and the Biden campaign had the lawyers lined up, but in this case, it appears that some of the larger law firms that might have been lined up early on for whatever reason backed out, and Rudy Giuliani was in charge. And I don't think that their army of lawyers was large enough. I don't know. It's a question, not a statement, but did they have enough lawyers who had experience in election fraud challenges? So basically, he says that the reason that they lost their election cases, all 60 of them, was they had bad lawyers. They didn't have a good team. The president of the United States, the sitting president of the United States, looking for re-election, could not, for some reason, could not find and assemble a team of lawyers who were capable of adequately representing this case and winning it, as opposed to they were wrong. They lost on everything because they were wrong. Now, why couldn't they get top-tier lawyers? Because they were wrong, and they knew they were going to lose. Wrong. Only Rudy Giuliani was going to go step forward with this. By the way, Mike Johnson was free to step in at any point. He files an amicus brief, but he's not litigating any cases. And he can't find his way into the room. Sidney Powell found her way into the room. She was listened to, but serious constitutional attorney Mike Johnson, member of Congress, could not find his way into the room. Now, you might say backbencher. Of course, not every member of Congress is known to Donald Trump, and, you know, he has to give you the personal invitation. Well, let me tell you this. Murdery Trader Green, who was not yet a member of Congress, she was a member-elect, she found her way into the room. She was at meetings in the White House. Mike Johnson, on his way to winning his 3rd term, couldn't get in the room despite the genius that he exhibited. I don't know. Why were the best firms in America dropping out? Maybe they knew something. Why weren't the brightest minds in America able to get into the room? I don't know. Maybe you're not that good. Maybe you overestimate yourself. Maybe Trump is that dumb. I don't know. But the president of the United States can assemble the best legal minds in the country, presumably. They have the right to refuse, but you would think there would have to be something extraordinary to drive them to refuse. And there was. They were wrong. And they knew that they would lose that case. And they didn't want to be the best legal team to lose the worst case in history. So they didn't go. It's a poor workman who blames his tools, I might add. Now, okay, he goes on to say, well, this is not to blame anyone, because then if he does blame someone, he's blaming his tools, and that makes him a poor workman. It is not so much that there are persons responsible for this. Normally, an election fraud case will be one Senate race. Here you had it happening, whatever it was, across the country, all simultaneously, and you had this very short window to prove it, and it was a shotgun approach by necessity, and because of that, it wasn't successful. Now, days later, even for Johnson, it came down to just Arizona and Pennsylvania. That's pretty scattershot, too. But why wasn't it more states? Ken Paxton had 4. Why are you down to 2? And there were suits in like 11, 12 states. Very quickly, you found out how many of them were wrong, and you had nothing, you had no leg to stand on. Until eventually you were down to Arizona, Pennsylvania, and it wouldn't have made any goddamn difference even if you had been right. Weird. Now, Chotiner says, the lawsuit states, quote, our country stands at an important crossroads. Either the Constitution matters and must be followed, even when some officials consider it inconvenient or out of date, or it is simply a piece of parchment on display at the National Archives. Ooh, scary. The justices that Trump chose and that you supported seem unwilling to save the Constitution, according to the lawsuit itself. Why aren't they trying to save the country from descending into a non-democratic hellscape? And he says, I would not concede that they are uninterested in that. I reject your premise. The problem is that you need the right vehicle to do that. I need the right vehicle to do that. I thought it was very interesting what Alito and Thomas said. They were acknowledging that perhaps some of this should have gotten at the merits. Chotiner says, well, they also said they would not grant other relief, though, correct? Right, but that is all they gave us, and we can read into it whatever we choose. It's conjecture on our part that they wouldn't grant a relief, arguably, of overturning the election. Yes, that would be an extreme request, but we were hoping is that they would take some aspect of this and make some sort of affirmative statement. Well, they didn't. And if they had just affirmed the plain meaning of the electors clause, about which he is wrong, that would solve all sorts of chaos going forward. I say this for Americans of both parties, or any party, or whoever they voted for. We should all have an interest in these very specific clauses of the Constitution being followed. I do. I have a very specific interest in it. And I think your interpretation of it is what leads us astray, sir. Chotiner says, well, that was the big thing about why people supported Trump originally, the importance of following the Constitution closely. Sure, exactly. And as an aside, I was on a radio interview this morning and was asked, what do we do now? Don't we need to beat them at their own game? And what is implied is, they cheated. We need to cheat better than they do. And my response is, wait a minute. We are supposed to be the party that stands for the rule of law. The party of Lincoln, Chotiner says. Exactly. What we're supposed to do is clean it up and make sure the hijinks don't happen in the future, or that they do. But unfortunately, the best way to do that with a silver bullet is to have the highest court in the land adjudicate it. And if we don't have that opportunity, we have to use other means, and it's going to be a great challenge. One more question. I guess we can maybe fit it. Oh, got a few more minutes. Trump, if you look at his Twitter feed, says there's a conspiracy essentially to deny him the election. Do you have any concern that people within his own administration or the justices he appointed are part of some conspiracy? Oh, I don't see a grand conspiracy. What I see is a lot of chaos and confusion across the land. And the result is that this election will have this giant question mark hanging over. I'm just asking questions, is the construction here all of a sudden. I saw a new poll. A huge amount of the country doubts the election and thinks it was stolen from Donald Trump. Wow, how could that have happened? 36% of registered voters in America believe the election was stolen. That is a problem. Whether it was stolen or not, the fact that such a huge swath of the country somehow believes that it was something that should keep us up believes it was something that should keep us all up at night. Nice conflation, Mike. Would one solution be, Ira asks, for people to stop saying it was stolen before knowing if it actually was? Would that alleviate it? Well, in an ideal world, of course. And I am a lawyer. I don't engage in conspiracy. I'm just a caveman, right? I want to deal with fact and truth. Even though the fact is that it doesn't say that the legislature set the rules for elections. It says they choose the manner of appointment, which is different. So many of these legal efforts have had such a difficult time having courts actually review the evidence. Some were kicked out on standing. It takes a while. It is a very detailed challenge to actually prove fraud in an election, which you said you weren't even trying to do. It takes time and has to be methodical, and I don't think that happened in all these cases, and I think that's why people have all these lingering doubts. They probably have lingering doubts because of all the conflation that's going on. By the way, I'll point out, nowhere in Johnson's theory does fraud enter into it. In his view, if every vote in every state in 2020 had been cast by a qualified voter and was verified to have been their vote and no other votes were cast. In other words, if 100% of the votes cast and counted are assumed, if we stipulate that they're all legitimate and belong to one person and one person only, one person has cast one vote in every single instance, and each person was qualified to do so, it still doesn't alleviate his objection. because they were collected in boxes that the state legislatures of at least Arizona and Pennsylvania didn't specifically say were the right size, shape, or color. And he would throw all of those votes out because that's his interpretation. He really thinks that the founders would have invalidated millions of votes because the state legislature didn't spend enough time describing the shape, color, and size of the box that they should be put into before they were counted. And that hasn't changed. So the 2024 election is equally open to challenge if it doesn't go his way, according to his theory. And that's why they have lingering doubts. All right, we'll try and cram in one more question. It seems like the upshot of what you're saying is that if the election had been stolen for Trump, not Biden, everyone should acknowledge that too. It shouldn't be about party. And so the point Trump should be making is that he would be standing up for the Constitution no matter who the election was being stolen from. And he agrees with that one. That's exactly right. I have gone to great lengths to say we have to be intellectually consistent about this. It's not just about the support of Donald Trump in 2020. It's about the institutions themselves. And if people doubt the veracity of the election system, that is the foundation of the maintenance of the republic. We can't keep a republic if people don't think their votes count. That's true, and I understand that. But your theory is that any votes at any time, anywhere, in any state can be declared not to count if your stupid, backwards, upside down, never had a shot in hell interpretation of Article 2, Section 1, or is it Section 1? Yeah, Clause 2 is, in fact, correct. That the new interpretation of everything is, Section 1, Clause 2, is that every single thing having to do with an election, if you can find any element of how an election, not an appointment, but an election was conducted that didn't specifically arise from an act of the state legislature, then all of those votes are invalid. I don't think we're going to be able to keep a republic ever, because how would you? Who could ever cast a vote under those circumstances? Well, anyway, the interview goes on at some length. You can listen to his podcasts. I assume that they're all like this, essentially, that it's all obfuscation, and he escapes into soaring rhetoric from time to time. Well, all I'm saying is democracy has to be preserved. Okay, but you're throwing out all these votes. Yes, but democracy has to be preserved. And by the way, we're not a democracy, we're a republic, etc. And his wife actually brought that one up. Anyway, I don't know. Happy listening if you can dare to listen to those podcasts.
Radio.com.
But if you can't, I have another suggestion next.
Listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
And that suggestion, of course, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. We'll see what's going on out here. Oh, look, Trump wanted his Legally Blonde moment, but he didn't get it. Yeah, we're going to have to get around to the courtroom antics and the flips that have been going on. But in the meantime, Justice will take you through all that next.